Hey everyone, if there was ever if I asked you, who do you think is the most misrepresented person you've ever known? I'm pretty sure for any sane human being, that person would be Sam Harris. If you were to say black people are apes, white people are apes, racism does not make sense. Salon would crop out the latter part and just say Sam Harris yells black people are apes. And then the cultish followers would swallow that in, and it would result in a Twitter feed explosion with people accusing Sam Harris of being racist. Now this trend continues to everywhere, where just because he's willing to talk about stuff like profiling or torture, these are dirty words, these are taboo words. However, they really shouldn't be. And he's stating his opinions. He's giving his honest views on this topic. And that results in regressive leftists turning against him and calling him racist, bigot. He wants to profile all Muslims. He wants to torture Muslims. And he wants... he's a neocon, Zionist neocon who wants to nuke the Middle East. On that message, for one page at the end of the End of Faith, where he simply said, in the conflict between ISIS or any jihadist group, ISIS wasn't there at that time, any jihadist group in the U.S., they won't have the same deterrence factor that the U.S. and the Soviet Union had, and now suddenly he wants to nuke the Arab world, whatever. And surprisingly, this also went on to a secular liberal, or she's actually not a liberal, a secular communist who escaped the Iranian regime, who fled Shia Islamism. I'm not making this up. Maryam Namazi. She's using the same language that someone like Reza Aslan or Glenn Greenwald would use when going over his views on profiling, for example. She went on to talk about profiling, and she was going all over how Sam's plan collectively punishes Muslims. We all know that's not true. What his actual view is that we should use this technique known as anti-profiling, where 90-year-old Japanese women and 5-year-old toddlers are not suspected of being jihadists. And why is that important? Because we have to admit that there's this key enemy when it comes to airplanes that we don't want to let them come in, which are jihadists. What percentage of them are Christian? What percentage of them are Buddhists? I know. Now, if we can't realize that fact, then we cannot move on. Now, once you admit that that's the truth and that we have to admit that, we have to ask ourselves, do we want the TSA to focus on a 90-year-old Asian grandma? Now, you can make your mind up as to you still feel that this is still collective punishment, but for any sane individual, it would be allocating resources successfully, and this is not bigoted or racist against anyone. This is simply being honest. If there's an Amish guy and if there's a Salafi imam, who would you, and the FBI had to go into either a mosque or an Amish place to find out information about suspected terrorists, who would he go to? If you said the imam, you're profiling against Salafi imams. Now that's very clear. When it comes to immigration, in this case, for example, she was going on as to how we have to be compassionate, that there are many secularists, many freethinkers in the Arab world who are running from the Assad regime and who need our help. Totally agreed. Even Sam agrees. There are millions of them who, as Sam said, are the most important people that we have to protect in our lifetimes. Now, however, what he's saying is, and he's been saying this all along, we have to keep out Islamists, ISIS sympathizers, and of course jihadists. On jihadists, everyone can agree, we don't want criminals and people who are willing to blow themselves up to come to the United States or Britain, for Maryam's example. However, her case is that we should let Islamists come in and then challenge their ideas. Not quite. Then she goes on to say how we should, it's they're the same as far right wing people who are like Donald Trump or like a Tea Party, and we can't prosecute them. We can't deport them. That's what she said. Now, when we let these people in, we can't prosecute them. We can't. When we let them in, the question is, why should we let them in the first place? Why should we let Islamists come in? And she went on to actually say that her enemy is the Islamists. Now she's saying we should let Islamists in. That's what I got. She also went on to contradict herself on many issues. Many times, on the same issue, many times, where she gave wildly different answers. She never quite answered Sam's question of, which she asked several times, should we let Islamists in? If we vet someone's an Islamist, what should we do? Why should we let Islamists in? And she never quite answered that. And I respect Miriam for what she's gone through. However, she, again, completely misrepresented Sam's views on profiling. And it's sad because we have this genius known as Sam Harris. And what everyone's argument against him is that he does this, he does that, he wants this, he wants that. However, they're not even his arguments. They were completely made up. And this is why we need to stop people stifling discussions and arguments and civil discourse. And Sam Harris has been the biggest receiver of this tactic used by people. And then this tactic is now spreading to people who we consider to be our friends. And that is why, in my view, we should educate people on what Sam's views actually are.